Okay, so I hope you have out a blank sheet of paper. This is the 1020 lecture, Introduction to Writing. The papers that we have to write. I need to make sure that you understand the general form of these papers and the way that we construct these papers. And I think, Mr. President, this is a very good review from the 1010 class, okay? The first thing I want to say about these papers is that you want to go to the learnstrong.com site. You want to look under Northwest College 1010. You want to review the lecture that I've given there on basic grammar rules. Basic grammar rules. Very important, because your papers are going to be scored down lower if you make some of the mistakes like comma splices, run-on sentences, blah, blah, blah. I've given that review, and that lecture is already posted, so you should watch that before you write your next paper. Just a suggestion, okay? Now, let's talk about the writing of these papers. The approach, okay, involves several steps, okay? And we want to kind of review these steps to make sure, all right, what we're doing. Step number 1. We begin, first of all, with a question, sometimes called a prompt, okay? And this is the assigned topic, all right? So, for example, 3 messages from Lord of the Flies. That would be an assigned topic. That means you have to write a paper on 3 messages from Lord of the Flies. Got me? Okay. So you begin, first of all, with the question or the prompt, okay? And here you want to begin to do some outlining, especially to get to your thesis sentence. Your thesis sentence is very important because it's going to tell us what your paper is about. If the assignment is 3 messages from Lord of the Flies, then in the first paragraph, at the end of the first paragraph, last sentence of the first paragraph, there should be a sentence that says something like, there are 3 important messages from Golding's Lord of Flies. That is a thesis. We do not want to say in this essay, I will write about 3 important messages from Lord of Flies. You are obviously the one writing the essay, so you needn't worry about saying in this essay. Got me? Does that make sense? Maybe you remember from that 1010 the suggestion for that. Step number 2. Here you begin the process of research. Okay, now this is a big part of our 1020 work. All right? That research involves 2 different places. What we will call the primary source, all right, which in our case would be the novel, Lord of Flies, or the text, we might say, okay, that you're working with, okay. In other words, you've got to find actual quotes from the text, right? Actual quotes from the text. How will I know in your paper that you are quoting? There will be what around the words? Quotation marks. Okay, right? Secondary sources will be your second area of research, all right? And this is the work you're doing with your databases, all right? As Lorena was talking about a moment ago, right? Your databases. Here, you're always looking for 5 quotes or references in your paper. Now, when you quote here, there are 2 ways you can do this. You can quote directly, which means word for word, right? And you can quote indirectly, and this means you summarize, okay? But you still have to say where this information came from, okay? You still have to tell us where it came from. Of course, this citing is what we call the MLA style book. Okay? Going online and studying some of the tutorials from Hinckley Library will help you learn how to do this better. All right? Okay? Now, this MLA style book is where I want to go next. All right? There's two important things we have to say about this. First of all, there's the work that we call in text or in the body of the essay. Okay, that's the first thing. The other thing is what we call end text or a works cited page. Okay, works cited page. Now go to that packet that I gave to you that on the front has a little table of contents. Remember the 10, 10, 10, 20 packet? And go to page 9 through 14 real quickly. And then look for sure at pages 15 and 16. 9 through 14, if you want, you can write this down on your notes. Pages of that packet 9 through 14 will show you this in-text citation. Pages 15 and 16 of that packet will show you a works cited page and what it looks like. Now, Mr. Perez, if you look at page 15 of that packet, you will see, wow, there's a lot of works cited, way more than 5. Right. This is a much longer model paper. But the way it's laid out on the page, still the same way. Notice as you're looking at page 15, there's some alphabetical order, last name first, etc., etc. Let me explain to you why it is we do this in the first place, just as a review from your 1010 class. Here's the deal. You're writing on 3 important messages from Lord of the Flies, right? So you go and do research. First of all, you look in the novel. You try to decide what are some important messages. Secondly, you go to databases and you look at what scholars have to say about Lord of the Flies. You read essays about Lord of the Flies, etc. Okay? Now you're ready to begin to actually make a full outline of your paper, right? And this outline will involve a thesis sentence, as we already said, and of course, points of validation, or POVs, number 1, 2, and 3. In other words, what are these? These are your 3 what? 3 messages from Lord of Flies, correct? This is the outline that you will make, right? This is the outline that you will make. After you've done some research, you will say, you know, I think there's 3 clear messages that I'm learning from this novel. I'm going to write about those 3 messages, okay? Now, in the body of the paper, we began the process of actually writing our paper. If you go to page 8 of your packet, that skeleton guide, that's what we follow, okay? We begin with 2 titles, right? A creative title can be anything you want. Flies stink. Creative, okay? The reason why the creative title, it really doesn't matter, is because right underneath the creative title, in parentheses, is your academic title. Your academic title tells us exactly what the paper is about. What would be an academic title for this paper? An analysis of?
A treatment of.
Treatment of what? 3 important messages from Lord of the Flies. The reason for the academic title, not only in the 1010 or 1020 class, but in other classes you will study, is so that the prof immediately knows that you understand what you're writing about. Especially if I were to say, write on a paper on Lord of the Flies, you decide what you're going to write on. It's very important to let the instructor know, this is what I'm writing my paper on. Got me? Makes it easier for the instructor to read your paper. In other words, the instructor knows you're writing on 3 messages from Lord of the Flies and not a history of the Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders. There are no Dallas Cowboy cheerleaders in Lord of the Flies. There are no girls at all in Lord of the Flies. Maybe that's the problem. They needed a woman there to tell them what to do on that island. Lorena is staying quiet. She's not agreeing. That's a debate for later. All right. So now we're ready to actually write a paper. We're going to begin with paragraph number 1, which of course is our intro, and read down through on page 8. All that stuff on Skeleton Guide needs to be there in paragraph number 1. You're going to name the author of the novel, Golding. You're going to name the novel, right? You can't begin to write a paper and say, for example, this novel or this poem. Why, Mr. Perez? We have to do what? We have to name the actual text we're working with, don't we? Right?
Or else you wouldn't have a clue.
Correct. The instructor doesn't know which of the text it is that we're working with. Remember, we just use the word text to reference a poem, a story, a novel, whatever, a play, whatever, right? So if I'm writing, for example, on 3 messages from Othello, now it's easy for you to say, yeah, but wait a minute, you assigned the topic of 3 messages from Lord of Flies, so why can't I just begin my paper by saying in this novel there are 3 No. We're playing a game back and forth. There are rules to the game, and one of the important rules to the game is, in your intro paragraph, you name the author of the novel, you name the title of the text, in this case, the novel, right? Give a brief plot summary of 1 sentence. Lord of the Flies is a story about some boys that get abandoned on the island and they turn into a bunch of heathens and start killing each other off. Saved at the end. That's the end of the novel, okay? So it's a simple sentence. Finally, last sentence of the first paragraph, intro paragraph, that's our thesis sentence. That thesis sentence needs to state very clearly what is being said. So, for example, this evening Lorena handed in to me a paper on 3 messages from John Updike's Great Scarf of Birds. Without looking at that paper, I should know that I can go directly to the last sentence of the first paragraph, and in that sentence it will say, in John Updike's poem, Great Scarf of Birds, there are 3 messages. If I don't see that language, I already know this paper is going to be a low paper. I don't even have to read any further. Why? Because that's part of the game that we are playing. In the intro paragraph, we're going to state specifically what it is that we're doing. We call that our thesis statement. By the way, Lorena, if after this conversation you decide to change, it's okay. All right? Better to get it right, correct, than to hand in something that's not right. You know, you lose points, yes? Finally, then we go to paragraphs 2, 3, and 4. This we call the body of your essay, right? Okay. And each one of these paragraphs will be one of the messages from Lord of Flies, to use our example, since, you know, that's my example I'm using. Or John Updike's Great Scarf of Birds. The first sentence of each one of these 3 paragraphs is what we call your topic sentence. Right? And that topic sentence will then tell the instructor what the rest of that paragraph is about. So, for example, I'll say it now about Lorena's paper, Great Scarf of Birds, 3 messages. I should be able to see a thesis that says, John Updike's Great Scarf of Birds, there are 3 important messages. I should be able to look at the first sentence of the second paragraph and immediately see what her first message is from Great Scarf of Birds. The first message from Great Scarf of Birds is, if I don't see that language, this paper now is dropping quickly to 40, 30, 20 points only. I don't care if she's written 40 pages. It doesn't matter. I need to know what are the messages you're writing about. That has to be said in your topic sentences. Got me? Okay? So for each one of these, you're going to have a topic sentence. Back to page number 8 in the skeleton guide of your packet, okay? I'm just outlining that page 8 if you want to go back and look at this. By the way, this lecture will be posted as well on Learn Strong, so you can go back and you can listen to this lecture again and, you know, kind of pay attention to some of the stuff if you missed it the first time. Got me? Now, in each one of these paragraphs, these points of validation, in each one of these paragraphs, you are going to have 2 kinds of validation. Ways to prove what you're saying about the message. One kind of validation is what we call internal validation. This is the actual text itself. These are quotes from the text. So for example, very simple. I pick up Lorena's paper, like you saw me do, right? I just scanned it. Did you notice I didn't even look at it 10 seconds, right? What was he looking at? 1, I read the last sentence of the first paragraph, right? I look for two things as I scanned that. One, did I see Updike's name and the title, Great Scarf of Birds? Two, did I see the language, 3 messages? If I saw that, I know she's already doing very well. If I didn't see that, we got problems. What's the next thing I looked at? I looked at the first sentence of paragraph number 2, POV number 1, right? This is POV number 1, paragraph number 2, POV number 1. And I looked to see what was the first message from Updike's poem. It should be stated right there in that sentence. If I saw the word message or something like that, and then what the message was, I know we're working okay, we're all right. The third thing I look for, did I see a quote from John Updike's Great Scarf of Birds, the poem, in that paragraph? How will I know it's a quote?
Quotations.
Right? There will be quotations from the text. Make sense? Now, if I don't see that, we're in trouble. For each one of your points of validation, you have to use quotes from the text. From John Updike's poem, from Lord of the Flies, whatever. From Othello, whatever. Right? Of course, it's really hard to do that if you haven't read the text. Right? Which is why writing these papers is what 10, 20 profs ask you to do. Very difficult to write one of these papers without first having read the text, right? Make sense? But we're not finished with validation. I said there were 2 kinds of validation. The second kind of validation is external validation. External validation, okay? This external validation is coming from?
Outside sources.
Right. Outside sources, from databases, from books that I've read, etc., etc. Okay? Here, again, I'm looking for quotes that will either be direct or indirect, right? Either way, I have got to provide information about where this came from, where this quote came from, okay? I've got to provide author's last name, right? Especially, I got to have that, correct? So that then I can know where to go to find that information on my Works Cited page, right? I got to have a Works Cited page at the end of my essay that will tell me where the full citation information came from. In the body of the paper, I'm never going to put the full URL information, http www blah, 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 blah. No, I don't put any of that information in the body of the paper. Where do I put all of that? On the reference page, right? Okay, but that information will match up because I have the name of the person I quoted in the body of the paper. Make sense? So for each one of my points of validation, I'm looking for 2 kinds of validation. Internal, quoting from the Updike poem. External, quoting from some other source. Right? So right away, I could scan Lorena's paper that quickly, and I could tell whether I'm looking at a paper of 50% or higher. If those things, those basic things are not there, we have problems. That's the downside. The upside is if they are there, I'm okay. Now the instructor will begin to look at what it is that I'm saying about these 3 messages in each one of these points of validation. Remember, our form tells us each one of these paragraphs, 5 to 7 sentences, right, Mr. Perez? So we're not going to hand in a 3-sentence paragraph. Way wrong answer, right? Way wrong answer. Of course, think about it. If you give me a first sentence that tells me what the message from the Updike poem is, and then you quote from the Updike poem, and then you quote from somebody writing about the Updike poem, then already you're probably at 5 to 6 sentences already before you even comment with your own views about, right? Now, Lorena had an important P word she said earlier. Remember? If you provide information, let's say you go online and you find information, but you don't say where you got it from, we call that what? Plagiarism. Major no-no. We don't want to do that, okay? Because we'll end up being guilty of plagiarism and then we fail the class. Okay, that's dumb. It makes no sense. All right? Finally, our works cited page needs to look just like page 15, 16 of your packet. Okay? Now, the easy way to do that is to use Noodle Tools. And again, that's outlined for you in the packet on page 4. On page 4. All you have to do is go in, set up an account on Noodle Tools, right? And you can use that. Remember, when you set up Noodle Tools account, make sure you say MLA. Yes?
Yes.
Because that's the style book that we work with. All right? Do you have any questions about this? Does that all kind of make sense? Uh-oh, let's go back now. Paragraph number 1, intro. Paragraphs 2, 3, and 4, points of validation, the 3 messages. Paragraph number 5 is what? Last paragraph. Conclusion. Very good. In the conclusion paragraph, we'll do 2 things. 1, we'll restate our thesis. There are 3 important messages from Updike's poem, Great Scarf of Birds. And then we're going to summarize our primary points of validation, our 3 messages. Okay?
Could you go over 7 sentences?
It's a good question. You can, of course, exceed 7 sentences for a paragraph, of course. I would say by the time you bump up against the ceiling of 10 sentences, you're probably going too long. Do you know what I mean? For our papers in 1020, it's normally accepted, though. Yes, it's normally accepted. All right? So, what are the sentences that matter most in Lorena's essay? Well, what are the sentences that she cut and pasted right on the front cover page? Right? For every one of your papers you're handing in, on the cover page, after the login information at the top, you are providing me with the thesis. You cut and paste it. After the essay is finished, you cut and paste that thesis sentence. You put it right on the page. You use the word thesis, put a colon, and then you actually give me the full sentence. Right? Then, POV number 1, POV number 2, POV number 3, first sentences from those paragraphs. Right? So I ought to be able to look right away at those 4 sentences and know 2 things right away about Lorena's paper. 1, she's writing on Updike's Great Scarf of Birds. Remember, she could choose any poem she wanted from that reading night. She chose Great Scarf of Birds. 2, she's writing on 3 messages from that poem. And those 3 messages are, bam, bam, bam. I ought to be able to read all of that in those topic sentences. Now, obviously, I don't know about the internal and external validation. Internal quotes from the Updike poem. External quotes either direct or indirect from her sources. I have to turn her cover page and begin reading or scanning her essay. To help me and help you, remember, in the left-hand margin, right, we have our paper there, right? In the left-hand margin, we are putting a little red X every time we use internal validation. Every time Lorena quotes from Great Scarf of Birds, she just puts an X there. There should be 1 for each what? Point of validation. In the right-hand margin, we're putting external validation. Any kind of work cited, we're going to put it here. How many of these red X's should there be by the end of the paper on the right-hand side? There has to be at least 5. Why? What's the requirement for works cited? How many sources?
5.
5.
For every source.
5. Okay?
So on the one side, external.
On the left side, internal. That's from the actual text. So, for example, from the Updike poem, from the novel Lord of the Flies. On the right-hand side, from our external validation. That's from our databases. That's from our research. Every time that you do this, you want to put a little red X. Now, obviously, you do that after you've printed the paper. Right? So, we have lots of work to do. Agreed? If you have questions, you email me. timmymcgee@yahoo.com. And then I can respond to those questions. Even though I'm traveling, I check my email every day. Okay? If you need to, you can even send me the paper as an attachment. I can look at it. I can look at it very quickly. Lorena knew when I was looking because she studied with me before. It doesn't take me long to be able to know immediately whether I'm looking at a paper that is the basic requirements. Now, why do we take our time in 1020 learning how to do this? Because you will have to write a paper like this for your psychology class, for your anthropology class, for your biology class, for your blah, 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 every class. When they ask you to write an academic paper, this is the foundational paper that you have to learn to write. You kind of learned it in 1010. Now you're learning it even better in 1020. Okay? But for some of us, 1010 was a while ago, which is why I've given this lecture. What's the most important thing? Don't quit. Don't give up.
Yes.
Keep working. Because you have to learn how to do this to be able to survive the academic community, so that you can get your degree, so that you can get the job that you want. Right? So don't quit. Keep working hard, and you will make it. Questions, comments?
On
Lorena?
the citation MLA, where did you actually say to go to if I have problems with that?
For the MLA information,
Yes.
several places. Look at this cover sheet. 1, pages 5, 6, and 7 of this packet. Right? That's all MLA stylebook stuff. 2, you can go to the tutorials for Hinckley Library. Remember, I suggested that you look at those?
Yeah.
That also will help you. Okay? Mr. Perez, I'll also be giving a lecture to my 1010 class tomorrow evening that will post on LearnStrong as well. So if you need additional tutorial help, you can always look at learnstrong.com. But remember, don't look under 1020, this class, but look under 1010. Okay? Lorena, questions?
And that's tomorrow's session?
That'll be tomorrow's session. I'll be giving a lecture tomorrow night. Okay, so that is the basic information. You are a very polite group of students.